Hey everyone and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps out the channel so much. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this as often as I can, and I'm always doing my best to make sure that these videos are as high quality as I can get them to be. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, nothing between the stories, nothing after the stories, just the one after this intro. I have to put at least one in there somewhere. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. You polish that one off right quick, Cheryl said, taking away the empty dish from my booth. You need a refill on that drink, hun? She asked. No, I'm good, Cheryl. Let's just get this over with. Sure thing. I'll be back out in just a minute, she said before heading to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. I hate Applebee's. Between the vintage Americana plastered to every wall and the dim lighting, the place is just depressing. Pick a lane and stick to it, I say. If you want to pretend to be a fancy pub, take some of the crap off the walls, and maybe get some tables that aren't made from the yellow laminate wood they let kids scribble on in preschool. Oh, and maybe serve me some food that isn't slop from a microwave. I don't mind crappy junk food. In fact, I just might like it too much. But don't take a Pinto and parade it out in front of me calling it a Porsche. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid, you know. I slammed my fist into said laminate table, earning me a glance from Dick and Balls over at the bar. They were here every day, but had never spoken a word to me. Hell, I don't even think I had ever heard them speak to each other. Quick as they had turned my way, they lost interest and went back to nursing their hose water. Dollars once again fading into background props for the drab local. Yep, I hated Applebee's, yet here I was. It was better than the alternative. I heard the double doors swing open and saw Cheryl coming down the lane with a large bowl in her hand. As she approached, a faint buzzing began to grow in volume with every step. When she got to my table, she let the bowl in front of me and pulled away the large cloth that had been covering it. The final dish was always served with a showman's flourish. For what reason? I still do not know. Oh my, don't that look good? Cheryl said, looking with genuine adoration at the writhing bowl of black hornets that she had sat before me. They were packed in tight, dozens upon dozens of the foul creatures. They frantically crawled over one another, buzzing angrily as they skittered. But they didn't leave the confines of the bowl. I sat immobile, staring at the dish. My finger tapped nervously on the table. You know, you could have some if you want, I said to Cheryl, who still loomed beside the table. She always stood and watched me eat. Oh, that's mighty kind, but I could never. That's your dish. You're the customer here. It's just my job to take care of you. Figures. Cheryl loved all the food, but never wanted to eat it. Go on now, she said excitedly. It's going to get cold. I'm working on it. Just give me a minute to appreciate my food. Okay, Cheryl. I whimpered at the lady, my voice cracking like only half a nut had dropped. Embarrassing, but who would blame me? She put her hands in front of those gestures of surrender, the kind you give when you weren't sorry for what you said. But sorry someone misinterpreted it. My apologies. I just want you to enjoy it, that's all. Yeah, enjoy it. Okay, Cheryl. Time was a waste, and there was one thing I was certain of. It was that sitting there staring at that bowl wouldn't make it go away. So I took a deep breath and reached inside. My hands pulsed with the vibrations of the wings as I raised the ball of fearsome insects and plopped them into my mouth. I started to chew and the wasps began to sting. White-hot pain filled my throat. While I chewed, the wasps not instantly ground up between my teeth angrily drove their stingers into my tongue. Some took flight in the small cavern of my mouth and flew down the back of my throat, choking me and piercing the soft walls of my esophagus with their stingers before sinking to acid death awaiting them in my stomach. My eyes watered. I reached into the bowl for another bite, some dropping out from the sides of my mouth when I couldn't fit the whole handful over my now swollen tongue. Cheryl dutifully scooped these escapees away like the discarded peanut shells I had spent my childhood happy throwing on the floor, all the while watching my agony unfold in solemn silence. An unsavory grunting was emanating from my throat now. It hurt to chew. Hell, it hurt to even flex the muscles of my throat. But my gag reflex was on autopilot, trying to free itself from the chitinous bits that clung to the back of my tongue like broken husks of popcorn. I tried to swallow my third mouthful of tiny demons and came up short. The wad of chewed bugs hung stuck in the back of my windpipe, refusing to go down. My throat was swelling shut. I retched, I coughed, I wheezed, I even wound up a fist and punched myself in the gut, trying anything to reclaim my open airway, but the multitude of stings were taking hold. With every second, I felt the breaths I took grow more shallow. One hand clawed at my throat while the other frantically waved at Cheryl, but I knew that wasn't going to do any good. She just stood by watching. Panic washed over me, followed by an intense wave of dizziness. I looked at her, pleading one last time before smacking face first into my table and spilling the remaining wasps to the floor. Cheryl took her rag and wiped the bugs clean, then picked up the dish and headed back to the kitchen. I awoke with a start and found myself sitting in my booth, the menu already placed in front of me. Every time it always felt the same, like you just came to from one of those dreams where you were falling and your whole body jolts to life, still carrying that imagined momentum. Cheryl has already made her way to me. That woman is not a time waster. What'll it be, hun? She asks, pouring me a glass of water. Just start me off at the top of the appetizers, Cheryl. We'll work our way down, I tell her in the tired, monotone voice that has become my norm. I'll go ahead and bring out the ultimate trio, she says before starting to the back again. Let's go ahead and bring the nachos, too. I call before she's out of earshot. Anyway, we can just get all of them out in one big pile. Cheryl gives it some thought for a moment, then shrugs. Sure thing, baby. I don't see why not. Did you know that there are 4 nacho platters on the app menu? God forbid a guy with a penchant for corn and decision paralysis ever darkens the floor of the establishment. They say variety is the spice of life, but they're wrong. It's a pain in my butt. Now, of course, by this point, I'm sure you all realize that this ain't exactly your run-of-the-mill Applebee's. And for that matter, I'm not your run-of-the-mill patron. I'm dead. Remember all that junk food? Turns out they gave you a big hint right there in the name. That crap just ain't good for you, and I eat a lot of it. The new generation has a word for it. Stunt food, I think they call it. Burgers stacked so high you can't fit your jaw around them. Or maybe a plate of fries coated in so many layers of meat and cheese that you can't even see the spuds. That was my thing. If a restaurant had some type of gimmick entree, I wanted to try it, and try I did often too often. Overall, I stayed pretty active. I wasn't even that big of a guy. But all that fat and cholesterol slowly built up on my insides sat hidden away, a silent killer choking out my arteries until one day my heart just couldn't keep up. Funnily enough, I had been out at the local park walking my dog when it happened. We got to the uphill portion, and each footstep I took started to feel heavier than the last. I figured I was just really beat, but when my breath began getting shallow, I knew something wasn't right. Another couple of steps and it felt like someone had tied a rope around my chest and yanked a taut. I was on the ground in seconds. Tater ran around me in frantic dashes, barking, while I curled up beaten to submission by the waves of squeezing and stabbing pain shooting through my heart. I heard some footsteps rushing up to me before I faded away. But they were too late. I closed my eyes on the world and woke up here at Applebee's. Threw a fit the first day I was in. Where am I? Where's Tater? What's going on? Got the attention of Dick and BS, who threw a pair of cursory glances my way from over at the bar. They paused the slow sipping on their cheap margaritas that always seem to be full even though there's not a bartender in sight, and stared holes into me. Wouldn't speak a word, though, when I hit them with my spattering of questions. The silence exasperated me further, and my voice got louder and louder till I was full-blown shouting in the empty restaurant. Eventually, my hollering mustered Cheryl from the kitchen, but by that point, I was already heading for the door. She tried to call out to me, but I wasn't listening. I heard a faint, "I wouldn't do that," before I slammed into that wooden door like a linebacker with 2-point GPA that knew a scout was in the crowd. The wave of heat that hit me in the face was a shotgun blast, point blank, straight to the skull. Beads of sweat pulled and evaporated before they could even run down my brow. As I flailed out the door and stumbled over my own feet, I could feel my lips dry and crack on the trip to the ground. I hit a patch of sidewalk and my skin sizzled, the first in a vast collection of injuries sustained at this godforsaken Applebee's. I leapt to my feet and my eyes grew so wide I expected them to bulge out of their socket. I was standing on a 4x4 block of sidewalk, but a couple good steps away from me, the ground just flat out ended. The Applebee's hung suspended over a gaping pit that burned with a fire the likes of which I had never seen. It made the horizon glow with a deep, hateful shade of orange and roared with such intensity that it sounded like I was trapped in a wind tunnel. Yet over the roaring blaze that was something more. It wasn't the roar of the flame I was hearing. It was screaming as I looked on in fearful awe. I could see them. Thousands upon thousands of bodies rolling, writhing, burning, dripping flesh of magma slowed off of them as they crawled upon one another, desperately pulling themselves forward, seeking any respite from the blaze. But with every forward motion of one, another slid further down, the process repeated ad infinitum, in ever-ascending ladder of the damned, reaching for an impossible destination. I was standing at the precipice of hell. You might want to come back inside. A voice behind me broke me from my stupor, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. If you fall, that's it. Done is done, Cheryl said, looking out over the pit with a sad gaze. I didn't need more convincing. I rejoined the waitress and took my spot at the booth that would indefinitely serve as my home. It was a bit more amiable to listen after witnessing the pit, and Cheryl gave me a vague yet simple explanation of my predicament. I was dead as a doornail. A simple fact that was easy to accept after stepping out that doorway, only to find myself at the brink of oblivion. Yep, I was dead, all right. But that status of my eternal soul, that's where things got confusing. Believe it or not, I was a pretty good fella before I kicked off to the afterlife. Sure, I've got a bit of an attitude now, but you spend your endless days in a lonely Applebee's overhanging eternal hellfire, and tell me just how sunny your disposition is. I met just about all the requirements to march my way to the pearly gates. I was a good husband, volunteered at an animal rehab facility, and still called my mom every weekend, even went to church on a fairly regular basis, and put my 10% in the plate every time. I would have been an easy case if it wasn't for that stunt food. Gluttony is a deadly sin, folks. And when you have to sign a waiver to eat a burger because it is so bad for you, well, that's gluttony. I had lived a good enough life to keep me from the hellfire, but I couldn't just waltz into the pearly gates. My consumption of all that greasy BS was close to willfully taking my own life. I had chosen to abuse my food, and I had to repent for my lifestyle. So, here I sat, not in a confessional booth, but one meant to feed a family of 4. Cheryl came out of the kitchen with one of those big platters in hand. She had opted to save time, and just had them make my nacho arrangement on the serving tray instead of separate plates. Here you go, hun. Careful now. That cheese is hot, she said, placing the mountain of corn chips in front of me. Anything I can get you? No, I'll be good for a while. Thanks, Cheryl, I replied, picking up a chip and starting in on the portion with the spinach dip. It only took a few bites before it hit me. By this point I knew it was coming. Happened every time, sure as clockwork. But that didn't make it any more pleasant. The all-too-familiar wave of nausea that came from stuffing oneself a little too close to capacity rolled over me. I belched and felt the acid in my throat. A little bit of spinach dip sputtered out onto my chin. Let me grab some extra napkins, Cheryl said. She returned a moment later with a small pile of paper towels and passed them to me, then returned to her spot, dutifully watching me suffer. It was always like this. Once I started eating, I immediately felt like I couldn't eat another bite, like there was no more room in my gut for more food. Yet I always did, and there always was. Acid reflux, nausea, protein farts. For the rest of the meal, I would be assailed by all of it. Sitting right on the verge of vomiting. On the rare occasion I did, usually on purpose, just to buy myself a brief respite from the meal while Cheryl cleaned the table. I don't know the inner workings of divine justice. But from what I could tell, the gist of it was this. I had willfully put my body through the ringer with so much crappy food that now I had to experience the worst of what it would do to my body day in and day out. According to Cheryl, the goal was to make it through the menu. If I could finish my meal, I could leave. The problem with that was the final item. This oust Applebee's had a special item on the menu, one that I could only order after I finished everything else. It was always a secret, and it was always horrible. The first time Cheryl ever brought out my final meal, I thought repentance was going to be a piece of cake. 3 blobby fish stared up at me from the plate as Cheryl presented it to me with a big smile. "Ah, they're so fresh. It's like we just plucked them up out of the ocean." She grinned, looking hungrily at the trio. I wasn't the biggest fan of seafood, especially whole and raw, but I was sure I could manage. I started chowing down and thought it was going well, all things considered. Then halfway through fish number 2, my fork clattered to the table. I had slipped out of my grasp as my arm went numb. I tried to pick it back up but found that I couldn't move. A couple more moments and I couldn't breathe. Turns out pufferfish are pretty poisonous. Tetrodotoxin it's called. Even the name sounds heinous. Next thing I knew, I was back in the booth, heart racing with that falling sensation, ready to start round 2. The next final meal wasn't so subtle. I did a double take when Cheryl plopped down a shimmering plate of broken glass. I was in utter agony as the micro shards embedded themselves into my gums and scraped at the sensitive roots of my teeth. By the time I had swallowed all of it, my throat was tearing open at the seams. Died a couple minutes later from blood loss. Getting into heaven wasn't going to be an easy task. I fought my hardest, I really did. But there's only so much a man can take before he starts to lose hope. I could make it through the regular menu like clockwork. Nausea be damned. But that final meal, the last hurdle to make it home free, was always too much. I had resigned myself to spending eternity in that booth. Yet I kept eating, I had to. Nothing that happened to me in here could possibly be as bad as the pit awaiting outside. And if there was even a sliver of a chance that I made it through the final course, well, how far would you be willing to go for eternal bliss? Sometimes Cheryl would be down for a moment of conversation. It was always a nice break from the monotony. She was business-minded, though. I could only keep her gabbing for so long before it was back on the saddle and time to eat again. I polished off the last of the lava cake. What a sorry excuse for a dessert. I'm pretty sure we sold those frozen bricks of chocolate for our school fundraisers back in the day. Guess Applebee's is a fan of education. No child left behind here. Oh, right, Cheryl. Guess it's about that time. Bring me my last supper. She gave me a bit of a frown, but not at all the same. I had a feeling she wasn't super big on the religious humor. I steeled myself, mentally preparing for whatever horrors awaited. Cheryl was quick on her feet. A few moments passed, and she was already bustling back through the door with a covered tray in hand. It was a big one today. My heart leapt in my chest when she pulled away the covering. It was a rattlesnake. I hated snakes, had been terrified of them ever since I was a kid, and Tommy Martin, the school bully, had let a black snake loose behind me in the bathroom. I stood atop the toilet, bawling my eyes out until the janitor heard and came to my rescue. That one had just been a baby, but the one sitting in front of me now was probably 7 feet long. I jumped in my seat when it rattled at me. I could see it following me with those glaring slitted eyes, watching, waiting for me to reach out and touch it, to give it permission. Once I laid my hands on it, it would be free to mess up my day, and I could tell that it wanted nothing more. The rattle sounded again, shaking right to my bones. Cheryl clapped with glee. Well, isn't that fun? I love novelty desserts so much. Is today your birthday? I wanted to slap that woman, but I was frozen in my seat. Out of all the horrible things I had faced, this was just too much. My hand trembled as I managed to lift it to the table, the rattler's eyes following my every move. Its forked tongue flicked excitedly. Go on now, Cheryl said. I couldn't. It's going to get cold, but I had to. I reached closer, my hand about to make contact. I swear I could see the snake's coils tense with anticipation right before brushing along the rough scales. I stopped short. In the throes of desperation, my panic-ridden mind had produced a Hail Mary, an idea so simple that surely it wouldn't work. Cheryl, I can't do it, I said. That last bit of lava cake filled me up. The snake let out another fierce rattle and I continued. It looks so good, but I'm just too full. I've already eaten so much. I should have quit a long time ago. Cheryl gave me a long look. You know, my mom used to always say, the meal's only done when you're full. A soft smile graced the edges of her lips. I'll go get your check. After all this time, after so many meals, I had complained, moaned, vomited. Hell, I had died. But I had always kept on going. Never once had I taken a moment to just say, no, thank you. Fueled by the desire to free myself, I was further trapped in a prison of my own making. I'm an idiot. I burst into a fit of laughter, a joyful, painful conglomerate of my pent-up agony, and my impending salvation flowed out of me in a fit of giggles. Earned myself the envied third look from Dick and Balls over at the bar. Cheryl came over with my receipt, and I hugged the woman. She returned the embrace as I cried into her shoulder. I really hate Applebee's, I said through sobs and sniffles. She patted my back while I bawled. I know, sweetie, let's get you upstairs. I'm the senior deckhand on a 68T Tweller called the Margaret Ann. I have worked this boat for 14 years. The crew is 6. Captain Hal, First Mate Donnie, Engineer Pete, and 3 deckhands, me, Manny, and Reuben. 6. Hold on to that count while I tell you the rest of this. I do the head count before every dredge. That's my job as senior deckhand. Before we lower the troll, before we haul it back, before we open the code end, I count. 6 men accounted for, all in their right positions. It's a safety thing. The code end can swing when it comes up full, and if we're missing a man we don't know about, he could be in the water. I have done this head count on this boat for 14 years. The number has always been 6. I want you to remember that I am the one who knows. 3 days into the trip, we set the troll over a section of bottom Hal had marked on the chart, 800 feet, the kind of depth where the haul takes nearly an hour and the cable hums under the load. We started bringing it up around 2 a.m. Hal called down asking what we had, and Danny said the sonar was reading a mass that wasn't fish, but just a single dense object in the code end big as a small car. Manny said it was probably a container lost cargo from a freighter. We've pulled up tires, refrigerators, an entire fiberglass dinghy once. Whatever it was, we couldn't dump it back. The net was tangled around it and the cable was straining. We winched it onto the deck. The code end hit the planks with a sound I had heard before. 11 years ago, I worked recovery on a ferry that capsized in fog. We pulled 14 people out of the water that week. They all sounded like that when we set them down on the deck. Not a thud, a wet weight. The way a body sounds when it has been in cold water long enough to take some of the cold with it. I had not heard that sound in 11 years. I was hearing it now. We did not open the net. Pal came down from the bridge. He looked at the code end for a long time. He told us to lash it down where it sat, leave it under the top, and not open it until daylight. He said he wanted Pete to look at it first. I did the head count. 6. Hal back on the bridge. Donnie on the bridge with Hal. Pete coming up from the engine room. Manny lashing the top. Reuben holding the spotlight. Me at the rail. We went to bed. In the morning we opened the net. There was nothing inside. The code end was empty. Not the catch fell out. Empty. Empty. The cinch line was tied. The mesh had a gap. It was a small gap right at the seam where the cinch meets the body of the net. The cordage was unraveled, not torn. It had come apart like fingers had worked at the knots from the inside until the seam gave. I stood looking at the gap for a long time before Hal called me over to help with the duck. I did the head count. 6. We started cleaning up. I was coiling the lazy line when I saw it. There was a handprint on the deck where the coat end had been resting. 5 fingers, palm flat. The heel of the hand pressed into the planks, the size of a man's hand, already drying in the morning sun. The wood around the fingers was wrong. The grain was raised, splintered slightly, lifted away from the surface, not pressed down, pulled. The handprint hadn't been left by something resting its weight on the duck. It had been left by something dragging itself across the deck, fingers digging in for purchase, the wood resisting and giving away in small fibers. I scrubbed the print with a deck brush before anyone else came back to that side of the boat. I don't know why I did that. We kept fishing. The next day, the catch was thin. We dragged the same bottom and pulled up almost nothing. Hal said we had spooked the fish. He moved us 30 miles east that night around 1 a.m. I came up from the bunk to use the head and Reuben was sitting at the galley table. Reuben does not work the late watch. Reuben should have been asleep. Reuben works the morning watch with me. We both came up at 4 a.m. He was sitting at the galley table with his back to me. He was not eating anything, he was not on his phone. The galley was dark except for the small light over the stove. I said his name. He turned around. It was Reuben. His face, his shape, but he was looking at me like he didn't know who I was. And his eyes weren't focusing on mine. They were focusing somewhere about 6 in behind my head. I said, "What are you doing up?" His mouth moved. The shape of his mouth made the words, "I'm hungry." The sound came a half second later. The voice was Reuben's voice, but it arrived after his lips had already finished the sentence and gone silent, as if the words had to travel from somewhere else to reach me. There was nothing in front of him. No food, no plate, no cup. I stood there for a few seconds. He turned back around and faced the dark wall again. I went to the head. When I came back through the galley, he was gone. The chair he had been sitting in was still pulled out from the table, not pushed back in. I put my hand on the seat. The wood was warm, body warm. I went down to the bunk room. Reuben was in his bunk asleep, snoring the way he always snores. I checked. I shook his shoulder. He woke up enough to swear at me, and then went back to sleep. I stood in the bunk room and counted. Al in the captain's cabin, Donnie on his bunk, Pete in his bunk, Manny in his bunk, Reuben in his bunk, and me standing. 6. I went back up through the galley. The chair was still pulled out. I put my hand on it again. Still warm. I went to bed. I came up at 4:00 a.m. for my watch. I walked through the galley on the way to the deck. The chair was still pulled out. I put my hand on it. Still warm. Same temperature it had been at 1:00 a.m. Body warm. The chair had been warm for 3 hours, and the wood was old, and the galley was cold, and nothing should have stayed warm that long. Whatever had been sitting in that chair was warming it from inside the wood. I worked my watch. I came back through the galley around 6 a.m. The chair was still pulled out. The wood was cool now. Whatever had been sitting there was finished. The next day, Reuben did not remember being in the galley. I asked him. He said he had slept through the night. I asked Manny if he had heard me come up. Manny said he had not heard anything. I started counting more often. Every time I came up on deck, every time I went down to the bunk room, every time I passed someone on the corridor, the count stayed at 6. The count was always 6. I am writing that down because I want it on the record that the count was 6 right up until it wasn't. Day 6 of the trip. Howell called everyone to the wheelhouse for a quick meeting about the route home. We stood in a half circle around the chart table. I counted heads. 6. He talked for about 3 minutes. He told us the bottom east of here had been dead and we were going to pack it in early and run back to port a day ahead of schedule. Then he told us to get back to work. We started filing out of the wheelhouse. The rest of the day I worked the deck. We were stowing gear, breaking down the troll, washing salt off the winches. I counted 3 times that afternoon. Each time I came up at the same number 5. I did not register that the number had changed. I want to be precise about this. I counted 5 and I wrote 5 in my head, and I did not feel the count was wrong. I just kept working. It was sometime around dinner that I realized I had been counting 5 for hours, and that an hour ago I had been counting 6, and that no one had left the boat. We were 150 miles from shore. No one could have left. I went to Hal and asked him who else was on the boat. Hal looked at me for a long moment. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "How many of us are there?" He said, 5. Always been 5. You feeling okay? I went back to my station. I did not finish the evening's work. I sat with my back against the rail and tried to remember the name of the 6th man. The name would not come. I have worked with him for 14 years. I should know his name the way I know my own. But when I tried to think of him, I could only think of his place at the rail, his hands on the cinch line, the way he laughed at one of Hal's jokes once on a calm day 4 trips ago. I could see the place where he should be. I could not see him. I went down to the bunk room. There were 5 bunks. I had never noticed there were only 5 bunks. I would have sworn there were 6. The space where the 6th bunk should have been was wool. The wall was old. The wood matched the rest of the bunk room. There was no seam, no hinge, no evidence anything had ever been there. I am writing this from my bunk. I have been here for about an hour. The crew is treating me normally. They keep asking if I'm feeling okay. They think I'm having a breakdown. I just got up and looked at myself in the small mirror over the sink in the head. It is my face. Every detail is right. The scar above my left eyebrow from the winch cable in 2019. The way my hair grows in 2 directions at the crown. The chip in my front tooth from a fight in 2014. I stood and watched the face for a long time looking at what was wrong. The face was breathing slightly behind me. When I inhaled, the reflection inhaled a quarter second after. When I exhaled, the reflection exhaled a quarter second after. The chest rose flat. The chest fell flat. I held my breath. The reflection held its breath. I tried to catch it, not breathing when I wasn't breathing. I couldn't, but the timing was wrong. I came back to my bunk. I sat down. I was looking at my hands. They were my hands. The scar across the right knuckle from the winch accident in 2019 was there. The ring of paler skin on the left finger from where I'd worn a wedding ring for the 4 years before the divorce. The small permanent stain of net tar on the right thumb that no soap had ever fully cleaned off. The hands looked right. I pinched the back of my left hand with my right hand. Pinched hard the way you would to wake yourself from a dream. I felt the pressure but no pain. I pinched harder. I twisted the skin between my fingernails. I watched the skin wring and crease. Nothing. I bit the side of my hand. I bit hard enough that I should have broken the skin. The skin did not break. My teeth pressed into something that gave like meat, but did not bleed and did not hurt. The hands look right, but whatever they are made of is starting to forget what hands are made of. I took out my phone. I have a photo from before we left port, the crew standing in front of the boat at the dock. I keep it as my phone background. I open the photo. There were 5 men in the photo. Hal, Donnie, Pete, Manny, Reuben. I counted them 3 times. 5. I have been looking at this photo for 8 days. I know this photo. I was at the dock that morning. I remember Hal making a joke about the weather. I remember Manny's mother dropping him off. I remember standing on the left side of the group between the cooler and the ballad, with my hand on Reuben's shoulder. I am not in the photo. The cooler is there. The ballad is there. Reuben's shoulder is there, and there is no hand on it. I have been at the dock. I have been on this boat. I've been at this rail and this wheel and these winches for 14 years. I am being unmade. The thing we pulled up from 800 feet did not come onto the boat to live here. It came onto the boat to take my place. It worked the knots in the coat end, from the inside until the seam gave. It dragged itself across the deck on its hands. It sat in my chair in the galley and warmed the wood from the inside. It wore Reuben's face for a few seconds at 1 a.m. to see how a face was worn. It is wearing my place now. Hal does not see me anymore. Hal sees 5 men, and one of them is in my spot doing my job with my hands on the lazy line. Hal is concerned about the man who keeps asking strange questions, but Hal does not know that man's name, and tomorrow Hal will not see him at all. I have been trying to remember my own name. I had a name an hour ago. I was using it in my head, like a word you wear. I just tried to write it down, and the letters would not come. I tried to write the name of my mother. I tried to write the name of the town where I grew up. I tried to write the name of my first dog. The shapes are slipping. Hal, Donnie, Pete, Manny, Reuben. I know those names. I have known those names for 14 years. One of those names was my friend. One of those names called my name across the deck on the morning the photo was taken. I do not know which. The trip ends in 2 days. There will be 5 men walking off the boat in port. They will not be missing anyone because by then there will be no one to miss. If you are reading this and you remember me, please tell me my name. It all happened when we were 8 years old. It started when my friends told me about a strange thing they saw while exploring the woods behind the school. We call it the hands, Craig said. It's so freaky. You're going to freak when you see it. It's so awesome. Miranda, Craig's sister, said. At recess they led me into the woods. We walked on the dirt path for 5 minutes until we came to a large distinctive tree stump. From there we took a left, off the path, and continued into the forest. The way was marked sporadically by arrows carved on the trees. That's how Craig and Miranda had found it in the first place. Following the arrows, after another 5 minutes, we came to a tall wooden fence, a square about 50 feet away. The old fence splintered and decayed. Remnants of white paint spelled DGRKPUT. We slipped through the gap left by a fallen picket. My eyes widened in disbelief at what I saw there. There were dozens of hands reaching out of the ground. One day, we counted them and found there were exactly 37. They seemed to grow from the forest floor like toadstools. They sat at all different heights. One stood almost a foot in the air, a whole forearm exposed. One was just a few fingertips, barely peeking out from the dirt. The rest were in between. They were scattered, seemingly random, but they were mostly about 6 to a foot away from each other. There were all sorts of hands, big hands, small hands, wrinkled hands, smooth hands. One had a shiny bracelet. Another had long pink nails with hot pink polish. "Watch this," Craig said as he grabbed a stick off the ground and poked a large hairy hand in its palm. The hand snapped shut, grabbing the other end of the stick. "Holy," I blurted out. "Do they all do that?" "Yeah," Craig answered, grinning. "But some are faster than the other ones," Miranda added. She pointed to a muscular hand attached to a thick wrist. "That one can even catch stuff if you throw at it." "But you can only touch them with a stick or something," Craig said. "You can't touch it directly." "What happens if you touch one?" I asked. "It gets you," Miranda said. "Duh." We visited the hands many times after that. They were a fascinating curiosity. One time Craig was looking at a particular hand and he called me over. "Whoa," Craig said. "This one has a birthmark just like yours." I cringed. At that age, I was still pretty self-conscious about the very noticeable purple birthmark in the approximate shape of New Jersey on the back of my hand. The hand Craig pointed to was that of an old man, pale and wrinkled. When I leaned in to see his hand, I had to admit the similarity was striking. "Maybe it's your twin," Craig said. "How could it be my twin?" "It's like 100, I replied. "I don't know," he shrugged. Another time we were watching the hands and a squirrel came along. This was unusual since animals usually avoided the hands. But this time, one of them was holding a plump black walnut between its thumb and pointer finger. After much trepidation, the squirrel stood up, climbing into the hand to snatch the treats. The squirrel was quick, but the hand was quicker. It grabbed the squirrel and began squeezing. The hand's knuckles turned white as the squirrel thrashed in its grip. We watched silently in a mix of horror and morbid fascination as the hand fought what we now realized was its prey. After about a minute, the squirrel stopped its thrashing. It made a few more futile spasms, then twitched, then went limp. The next time we returned to the hands, the squirrel was gone. The last time we spent at the hands together, we were hanging out after spring break. Miranda told us that she had come up with a new idea for a game we could play. Over break, Miranda and Craig had gone to visit their grandma who lived up by the beach. On the way there, Craig was showing off the shark tooth necklace and the mood ring he'd bought at an aquarium gift shop over break. He explained what all the colors on the ring meant and how his dad told him the ring was made by scientists at NASA. Miranda showed off the henna tattoos on her cheek and the back of her hand. "Emily, their cousin, did it for me. She's a real tattoo artist and stuff," she bragged. "Looks like butts," Craig schnelled. "They're hearts," Miranda said, stomping a foot on the ground. "Miranda has butt tattoos," Craig said in a sing-songy voice. "Whatever," Miranda said. The argument stopped as we arrived at the hands. "So, here's the game," Miranda said. "You have to be super brave." With that, Miranda hopscotched between the hands. She took jump after jump, threading the needle between them until she got to the other side of the clearing about 40 feet away from us. "Come on," Miranda called over to us. "It's easy." Me and Craig both hesitated. After a long, heavy pause, Craig spoke up. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he said. "'Cause you're scared," Miranda teased. "I can tell 'cause your ring's black. That means scared. I can see it from here." "Nuh-uh. It's not black, it's blue," he said, raising his hand. "See?" Craig took a deep breath, puffed his chest and jumped through the hands. Well, he did so less gracefully than Miranda. He made it through to stand next to her. "Now you have to try," Craig said, pointing at me. "I don't want to," I said. "What if I accidentally touch one chicken?" Miranda teased. She and Craig made squawking sounds at me while folding their arms like chicken wings. "You're being dumb," I argued, my cheeks feeling hot. I took a hesitant step in between two of the hands, then I took a hop deeper into the field. On my third hop, I almost lost my balance. For a split second, I was sure I was going to fall into the grip of the bed of hands. However, I quickly regained my balance. Scared, I hopped back out to safety. "Lame," Craig teased. "You barely got in at all." My heart was still pounding from almost falling. My cheeks started burning and I felt my eyes begin to well up. "This is a dumb game," I yelled. I don't want to play anymore." With that, I stormed off. Craig and Miranda called after me, but I didn't listen. To this day, I wonder if things would have gone differently if I hadn't stormed off in my little temper tantrum. That night, there was a ring at my door. It was Craig and Miranda's parents. They hadn't come home that night. My parents asked me where I last saw them. Craig, Miranda, and I had a sort of unspoken understanding that the hands were a secret. We hadn't told anyone else about them, as they seemed the kind of things parents may not approve of. But now I was worried. We went out into the night, flashlights in hand, and I showed them to the area. They looked at the scene with awe and disbelief, scanning it with the flashlights. A few seconds of looking later, Miranda's mother screamed. After another second, their father started screaming too. Their flashlights were fixed on two hands jutting out from the ground, right next to each other. These hands hadn't been there before. They were the tallest there, as nearly their whole arms protruded from the ground. When I looked at them closely, my heart sank. They were small hands, a black mood ring on one, a heart-shaped henna tattoo on the other. I want to preface this by saying I am not a good person, though I try to be. I've had a troubling past, got mixed in with the wrong internet crowd, and a lot of toxic ideologies. I began stalking when I was 16, after my first girlfriend left me for another guy, and I, in my pain, found myself reading about similar experiences and forums I shouldn't have been in, and got the idea of getting back at her from some internet spaces. As I grew up, I began agreeing more and more with some ideas about women that made me a pathetic and insecure man. I became severely attached to my partners and wanted to have total control, always fearful they might be cheating on me or doing something else to try and hurt me. It didn't help that I was always rushing into relationships, always trying to avoid that sense of utter loneliness that came with being single, that came with partners who hurt me. Partners I hurt, and some mutually assured destruction. My insecurity and distrust made me a somewhat skillful stalker, and I secretly spied on my partners however I could. I will not share the methods I used here, for that might invite others to try the same thing, which is not my objective when I was 24. My stalking and hateful behavior almost got me in jail. I got a restraining order, was required to attend anger management classes and therapy. It was the first time I had to face consequences for my abhorrent actions. And while I'll be the first one to admit that these consequences weren't as severe as some people might want for people like me, they ended up actually helping in setting me straight. My therapist was an older woman I'll call Miss Price. She helped me a lot in dealing with my issues, all the deep-seated hatred and insecurities I had. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be who I am today. 6 years later, she learned every bad thing I went through, every horrible thing I did, and showed me kindness and understanding I never thought I deserved. Over time, she became a sort of motherly figure to me, and although at 26 I had made so much progress that my visits became more sporadic, I still kept in contact with her via email and social media. 3 years ago I met Emma, a gorgeous girl with a bubbly personality and a heart of gold, always wearing muted greens and reds and sweaters and scarfeves. Silky brown hair reaching down her back and a pair of round glasses that completed that cozy look that immediately made me feel attracted to her. Feeling like I could do better now that I had overcome a lot of my issues, I struck up a conversation with her. Since our first interaction, I felt static in the air. She was such a fun person to talk to. Everything she said got my immediate interest. Despite my sudden approach, she was nonetheless friendly. And after an impromptu first date, we found ourselves following each other on social media and exchanging phone numbers. The instant attraction was mutual. That much was clear. We made plans to go out again the very next week. And over time, our dates became more frequent as we became more involved in each other's lives. Emma was a light fantasy writer and had a blog in which she posted short stories on. She was fairly popular and even had a novel on the works. When I first got to read her works, I was immediately transported into the world she portrayed with pen and paper. Truly, my new friend had clear talent, and that aspect made me fall for even more. Still, I made sure to take it slow. I wanted the both of us to get to know each other better before asking her to be my girlfriend. After 5 months, however, Emma was the one that confessed her love for me. I was so happy to hear that from her, but I knew I couldn't start a relationship with her without telling her about my past. So I did. I told her everything. The things I'd done, the things that were done to me. I tried to be as raw as possible, not to excuse my actions in any way, and to show I was trying to be a better man. And sweet, sweet Emma decided to give me a chance. She was truly an angel, and I promised to myself that I'd be the best boyfriend I could for her. Our relationship developed a lot quicker after that. And while I often found myself thinking of checking her phone for anything suspicious, while she left it unattended, or trying to look through the list of people she followed in her accounts, I always stopped myself before I could act on it. I tried my best to trust her, and I was always honest about having those thoughts with her. Sometimes she'd show me the people she was talking to all on her own, trying to ease my worries when I was struggling the most. Emma cared deeply about me and wanted me to get better. Her openness was so refreshing, and it was something I had never experienced before. Her support meant the most to me, and over time I found myself able to feel at ease while being with her. There were still times I felt a worry or need to do something stalkerish, but it became a lot easier to manage as I had no real reason to doubt Emma in the slightest. In my happiest moments, I considered both Emma and Miss Price to be my saviors. Everything changed about 1.5 years into our relationship. Emma was an only child and still very involved in her parents' lives despite living on her own and being only a year younger than me. I couldn't say the same about me. My parents hated me for becoming such an awful person, and they were unwilling to give me a second chance. I understood where they were coming from, but that didn't make it hurt any less. It was winter time, and Emma's parents invited us to a trip in the mountains. By that point, we had been acquainted for a while, and thanks to their kindness, no doubt where Emma got that from, I felt like I had a family again. Tragically, I was unable to go, as my work kept me especially busy on the days leading to Christmas Day. Sometimes I wish I had gone. Maybe things would have gone differently then. The day before New Year's Eve, a man called me on the phone claiming to be a man named Hank, one of Emma's uncles. He said I was listed as Emma's emergency contact and told me the bad news. Emma and her parents had gotten into an accident. Apparently, a bear managed to get into their cabin and things got ugly. The bear killed both her parents, and while Emma herself ended mostly unharmed, save for a few minor injuries, the experience severely traumatized her. Damn unfortunate to come across a bear during wintertime, he said solemnly. I couldn't put it any better, and that very same day, I found myself rushing to the hospital Emma was in. The woman that laid on that hospital bed was almost unrecognizable. She had white bandages wrapped around her left arm and upper thigh. Some splotches of dried blood clearly shown in various spots. Truly, the injuries didn't seem that bad, but her expression. It was an expression I had never seen in her face. Neither anger nor sorrow, rather complete emptiness. A nurse told me she was still in an emotional shock, and that it might take weeks or even months for her to recover. As I tried talking to her, she replied to me in a dry, monotone voice. Her eyes looked dead, as if there was nothing left of the woman I loved. Later, I found she had incurred memory loss. Weeks passed and I had her move in with me so I could take care of her. It was an uncomfortable time, but I genuinely wanted to take care of her and help her recover. She became clumsy and she had forgotten even the most basic of things. I had to teach her things like how to eat properly and how to cook. She was relearning many things, including some she taught me herself in the past, and most of her friends and family were severely worried for her well-being. I sought the aid of specialists in the medical field and was told it was most likely due to high stress or perhaps some head injury we didn't know about. After getting some studies done, we were told they could find no such injury. At least her ability to relearn these skills wasn't impeded in the slightest, and it seemed as if her mind was as sharp as ever. It was a tough time, and with memory loss, I was also forced to manage her social media and keep note of her passwords while she readjusted. This gave me a lot of unwanted power over all her messages and information, but I felt proud for being able to fight those urges with relative ease. 6 months later, things came back to a somewhat normal state. Emma learned things quickly and seemed to become much more efficient at doing everything than before. That also came with a shift in personality. However, her bubbly and kind demeanor changed to a more serious and uncaring attitude. It was as if she had become a completely different person, as if my Emma wasn't there anymore. At first, she wouldn't even hug me, and I didn't want to try any kind of intimacy knowing she didn't remember her feelings for me. We didn't even sleep together. I just let her sleep in my bed while I slept on the couch. As she began